Bet the board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Fuhrman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast, NFL Week 15 edition, and some great marquee matchups on the Sunday slate. More about them a little bit later in the program, but an outstanding appetizer as well to kick things off this week on Thursday Night Football. I'm your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and co-host, the one, the only Payne Insider. And Payne, a busy Sunday afternoon on the docket for you if the early games leave a little bit to be desired.
I feel like there's something in there that you think I should be cognizant of that I have no idea where you're going.
No, all I'm saying is you get to give your beloved Dolphins undivided attention on the early portion of the Sunday slate before all the big boys play in the afternoon time slot with the marquee matchups of the weekend.
That's true. My other guy is playing at 1 o'clock as well. We'll see how that unfolds.
Yeah, a little bit of inclement weather, though, for that guy. And you know what? As long as he's got a horseshoe, they can keep winning football games. But they will not be part of our big game breakdowns on today's show.
Did you see who had the largest net success rate edge last week?
The Los Angeles Chargers.
Edge. I said edge.
That would be a deficit. That would be a deficit.
That would be the deficit.
So, look.
You're going to confuse people that you graduated college and I'm the dropout.
I mean, look, college was 20 years ago. So at this point in my life, what you've accomplished in your life far surpasses me. So advantage you in the grand scheme of things for all of this.
All right, let's
you want to talk Rams-Niners?
Let's not lose. Well, we've already lost our fucking minds at this point in the season. So
all right, Rams-Niners.
Might as well do it on the microphone.
49ers. Well, I mean, this is sometimes what the people want. They want you to peel back the curtain in terms of what goes on with the tomfoolery and the shenanigans behind the scenes. 49ers a 2.5-point favorite at home tonight, hosting a division rival in the Los Angeles Rams. Total 48.5. This is a game that has been an ongoing battle throughout the course of the week. 1.5 out to 3, threes gobbled up. The total taking some under money amid expectations that we could have some inclement weather. And if we go back to the first meeting, that game kind of defied the odds. It was the Rams erasing a late deficit despite not having Puka Nacua or Cooper Kupp for that game. The 49ers had entered the contest 50-0 under Kyle Shanahan when they had a 14-plus point second-half lead, including the playoffs. The Rams had come up with 101 straight losses when they faced a 2-touchdown deficit, including the postseason. Rams, meanwhile, have not won this season series since 2018. Credit to the Rams. First time all year, they have a winning record, 6-2 since the bye after entering the bye 1-4, trying to replicate a bit of history that saw them get white hot after the break. The 49ers keeping their season alive with a resounding victory last week against the Bears. Still plenty of work in front of them should they make a little bit of a push at 20-1 to win the division or find themselves in the thick of the playoff discussion if a couple of dominoes fall around them. Payne, every time we talk Rams-Niners, it's always about the level of familiarity between head coaches. Kyle Shanahan on one sideline, Sean McVay on the other. In terms of this matchup, a short week, Rams off an electric and most dynamic offensive performance. The 49ers looking a little bit more buttoned up, potentially getting a key contributor back on the defensive side of the ball. You being the X's and O's guru that you are, which is the one matchup that you are most intrigued to see unfold tonight that could go a long way in determining which side gets you to the window?
I think there's so many things, and now as it appears the weather is going to be present, my mind is taking me in another direction
cyclone,
as well.
Which term are we going with for tonight's game?
None of that. It just looks to be wet. Purdy looked fully healthy against Chicago. And I say that because the throws he was timid making in Orchard Park against Buffalo might have been more weather-related than health. And I go back to like a text message I had as we think about this. And Purdy has not been great with a wet ball. I mean, that's kind of throwing a little bit of a wrinkle in my mind here on on the fly. But what's really interesting is, like, as last week went on, info started coming out of the 49ers camp that Purdy no longer needed rehab sessions for the shoulder. Let's see, on a short week if there's some impact there. Now that the weather's in play, let's see how that looks. The other aspect that surfaced Sunday morning, and I know you do a lot of Sunday morning work with pregame shows of your own, but I got 4 TVs rolling, different things going on, but it leaked Sunday morning that the 49ers had a players-only meeting that occurred late Saturday afternoon that leaked into the evening, and Kittle initiated it and led the conversation. Purdy spoke, which was very uncommon. He's more of a quiet guy, lead by example guy. Other players got out and spoke, and the conversation centered around energy and effort, playing hard. Something Kittle wasn't seeing on the film from everyone, and then all of a sudden you get out and you have that supreme effort from the 49ers Sunday against the Bears. Now, the offense still isn't fully healthy for the 49ers. Trent Williams is down again. The 49ers are potentially on running back number 4, Patrick Taylor, tonight. There is some conversation about Garendo trying to give it a go. Deebo Samuel
said he was going to try and go, trying to make sure all those fantasy managers have an idea of who may or may not be available for the playoffs.
It's one of those things. One, we saw him at Louisville. Like, he's a tough guy. You're also in an opportunity you never envisioned yourself being in when you look at the depth chart and you see CMC on it and Mason and Jordan Mason on it at the beginning of the year. It's like, this is your chance. So you try to do everything you can to get out there. We saw Deebo try to lighten that workload for Garendo last week. I mean, looks like a little bit of a shell of himself, 2.6 a carry, just not breaking any tackles. Looks like he's got a little extra weight on the frame a little bit too.
Yeah,
so,
well, he had heavy fingers on the keyboard when it came to social media after the game, so I'll give him that much.
Yeah, it's an interesting take considering, you had 5 carries and it just, and, peel back the curtain a little bit. We had some rushing yard stuff on him. Hard Rock was late to that party, like 6.5. Everyone else was dealing 10.5 on the rush yard. So he had 3 carries for -3 yards, and it was kind of in my usual. I don't know what happens around that time.
I was going to ask what you were going to share with our listeners in terms of what goes on in Sunday afternoon. I mean, I know a little bit more, but it's not my place to share.
So it's you're constantly in front of the computer from the time you wake up, like 6 a.m. and you're getting all your stuff going for the 1 o'clocks, and you're finalizing potentially the 4 o'clock stuff. And so once those 4 o'clocks start, you kind of gravitate towards the couch and you pick up some food and, you start acting like a normal human. And then, like, at that point, it's like I usually end up dozing off on the couch from like the middle of the third quarter to like the middle of the fourth quarters of the late games. And so when I saw 3 carries for -3 yards, I'm like, this thing's dead and buried. I wake up and like, oh, okay. It's good. So getting back to the actual conversation here that's meaningful to others is Deebo Samuel's looked a little bit
overweight.
Yeah, he looks kind of like he's cooked. So then I look at this matchup, and it comes down to some pressure. Purdy has certainly been impacted by it. The Rams defense also has a massive delta when they don't get home versus when they do. Little bit of a easier matchup for the young kids up front, specifically against this offensive line without Trent Williams than a week ago against Buffalo's unit. But if the picture's clear for Purdy, he typically shows really well. The Rams live in zone coverage. Purdy has been drastically better against that type of coverage. His game is really about accuracy and throwing to spots and rhythm, and Purdy's top 8 in most of the meaningful metrics against zone coverage, well below average against man this season. But again, this new wrinkle we have now with the potential of a wet ball and some rain, maybe Purdy doesn't show as well. George Kittle didn't play in the first meeting. He's obviously a massive factor to this offense. We talked about him, leading that players-only meeting on Saturday evening. He's also led by example on the field in recent weeks. This is a great spot for him. He's been one of the big beneficiaries against zone coverage this season. 3.2 yards per route run as Debo's kind of diminished a little bit. Kittle's taken over that role as the supreme contributor against zone coverage. If you remember last year, we talk about, when the 49ers face zone, it would be Debo. When they face man, it would be Ayuk. Now it's very much Kittle controlling the zone efficiency for this passing offense. Now, we've seen a little bit of a battle in this game. Go figure. At 1.5, 2.5 49ers money so far this week. Rams get to 3 flat, and we started to see that buyback yesterday on the dog. If the Rams are going to have success, Kyren Williams has to be a key cog in that. 31 touches on Sunday. This is a quick turnaround, so maybe you get a touch more of Blake Corum. We've started to see him get implemented more as the weeks go on, as we expected and what we had heard from the start of the season. 49ers defense has struggled to stop the run. It started to be their weak point last season. They were still middling, but it was their Achilles heel. It's 20th in overall defensive rush efficiency on the season, bottom 7 since Bosa went down in EPA per rush allowed. Again, with the rain in the forecast, you'd think that would impact the Dome team a touch more, but if they're the better running team tonight, then, Bosa does seem to be trending a little bit better. Matthew Stafford has certainly surged since the offensive line got healthy. Pressure rates have dipped dramatically, 28% pressure rate since the Rams projecting starting 5 all returned. Let's keep an eye on that tonight, right? Because Alaric Jackson battling some things, was a DNP yesterday. If there is a situation where Jackson's down, Bosa's up, that is certainly kind of a twofold factor, because the 49ers pressure rate is 13% higher when Bosa's been on the field this season. And if you don't have your starting left tackle, that would be somewhat concerning. Total-wise, we've seen a buy order come in at 50. We're now down to, call it like 48.75 here with some of the weather coming in. This one has become a little bit more interesting with this rain when you think about a Dome team, when you think about some of the deficiencies Purdy's shown with the wet ball. So, yeah, it's making this one a little bit more difficult, but I think ultimately, as you trend potentially down towards 2.5 flat, it does open up the advantage teaser window there for the Rams with both teams' seasons on the line. Familiar matchup. McVay has shown very well in this matchup in recent times, so it's always tough, though, wanting to buy a team off a peak performance, and you have both of these teams.
Obviously, that's what I was going to ask you.
Coming off that,
both of them would qualify as peak performances
tough
with their offensive outbursts last week.
Yeah, momentum is a thing, although difficult to quantify, but you think about this, and it's like, the mindset, if you're backing the Rams, like, we can get 3 on the Rams and fucking close 3 against the Bears. Well, sign me up for that,
Earlier this year, the Bears were a 2.5 point favorite at home against the Rams, if you want to use macro level discussion.
So it's... I can see why there was a buy on the Rams, and then all of a sudden you hear about the players-only meeting, and you hear about Kittle calling his team out for energy and effort, and then you get it. You get their best performance of the season. You're watching guys every single snap play to the whistle with full-blown energy and effort, and you're like, okay, I got to buy this team at 1.5, 2. There just isn't much for me here at this point, and we've taken a little bit of a lower volume approach this season with all of the battles going on, and now you implement this weather into the fold, and it just kind of opens up the variance even a touch more now as we discuss this at 2.5.
No doubt about it, and we'll see exactly, to your point, which players are or aren't available for tonight's game. Another thing that's interesting as far as Sean McVay, his teams typically get better later in the year. 23-11 straight up during his coaching career in the month of December, 23-10 ATS. It includes 12-3 straight up run and a 13-2 ATS run during the month of December going back to 2021. So we saw it from the Rams last year. They get hot when it mattered most, and we'll see if they can carry that momentum forward as the 49ers season hangs in the balance as well tonight up there in Santa Clara. On Sunday,
it seems like when you have elite players and it's recognized that it's like go time,
they just find another
start
gear.
To get, yeah,
they're just able to take things to another level. And you mentioned Matthew Stafford and the numbers. I mean, didn't look anything like the quarterback we saw last week against Buffalo with his decisive decision-making with all of his weapons compared to the guy early in the year that more often than not was getting bet under 1.5 touchdown passes on a week-in, week-out basis. Sunday, Payne, it is a state championship, according to head coach Mike Tomlin, between the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Philadelphia Eagles. Eagles, 5.5 point favorites. Total on the game, 42. We found out earlier this week that the big injury to monitor was that George Pickens, who tried to give it a go last week against the Cleveland Browns, had a much more serious hamstring strain, calling it a grade 2, undergoing an MRI. And knowing this will start a stretch for the Steelers where they'll play 3 games in 11 days, you wonder how much they want to push their one major difference maker on the outside. Steelers, we mentioned how much their schedule will become an issue over the next couple of weeks. Philadelphia, meanwhile, they come in off a 22-16. I guess I would best describe it as a workmanlike performance against the Panthers. Jalen Hurts, 2+ passing touchdowns and 1 rushing touchdown. Clinched a playoff berth with the win. It's the 4th straight playoff appearance for Philadelphia, and the longest for the franchise since they went to the postseason 5 years in a row back in the early 2000s. They remain undefeated this year when A.J. Brown is active. We, of course, have followed a little bit of the off-field drama between Jalen Hurts and A.J. Brown. Brown saying the passing game needs to get him more involved. Every wide receiver believes they're open on every single play and wants to be thrown to 97% of the time. Pittsburgh, though, yes, on the scoreboard, it looked like a convincing win against the Cleveland Browns, but you dig into some of the underlying numbers, and they weren't nearly as dynamic offensively as what we've seen earlier this season. Russell Wilson, who's averaging more than 250 yards passing per game, just 158 yards passing, and he spread it around to the likes of Pat Freiermuth, Scotty Miller, Mike Williams, and Jalen Warren out of the backfield. Steelers defense still a plus unit, even if Joey Porter Jr. has trended a little bit south in terms of picking up penalties at a rather alarming clip. Most likely going to be tasked with marking A.J. Brown. Whether he'll travel with him remains to be seen. But Payne, this game on the surface, look, you peel the jerseys and the names away, and Philadelphia appears to be a little bit short, but we've seen what Mike Tomlin does time and time again. He covers at a 65% clip as an underdog over the last 100 times he's been listed in that role, and the Steelers have been absolute ATM when they're catching points this season. Not just 5-0 ATS as dogs, but 5-0 straight up. Steelers, Eagles, what are you looking for Sunday afternoon from Lincoln Financial Field?
Certainly, you mentioned the big national story there with the drama going on between Hurts and Brown, and that gives reporters something to ask and write about.
And players in the Eagles locker room that are injured.
They feel all right doing it once Brandon Graham mentions it publicly. Will that play a role here? Who knows? It sounds like it's been going on for the entire season, and it dated back to last year, and here they are at 11-2. Jalen Hurts, to me, has struggled a little bit playing on time. His style doesn't necessarily mesh with what Kellen Moore wants to do. We've talked about this, I think, a few times, but
yep.
Through the course of a game, you can tell when it's the Kellen Moore offense versus the Jalen Hurts offense. And what's interesting, though, is like full season, Jalen Hurts is number 1 in completion rate over expectation. Top 10 in dropback EPA. So the notion he's been horrific throwing the ball isn't necessarily true. I think where the problem lies for me and watching Hurts and digging into the numbers is the unwillingness to get rid of the football. 3.2 second average time to throw when pressured. That number hikes all the way to 4.1 seconds. He doesn't have the wiggle or the burst of Lamar, so more than 22% of pressures against Hurts have turned into sacks. And that sets the offense back, especially when you are a run-first offense. And you think about having a mobile QB, I think your hope is like the ability to evade pressure and turn a play that's absolutely dead into a positive one. That's the upside of having the mobile quarterback, because it's mentally backbreaking for a defense when they have you dead to rights and somehow you look up and there's a 17-yard play happening downfield. But that just hasn't happened enough. Hurts has been horrific under pressure, 5.5% turnover-worthy play rate, less total big-time throws under pressure. As the Eagles' offensive line is, you're looking third in pass block win rate. And so it's like, okay, this shouldn't be a problem where, Hurts is dealing with this much pressure, but just holding on to the ball forever. So there's got to be I think if you're looking at A.J. Brown, it's like he probably should be your first read. And I understand if he's not there, you kind of move on and go through your progressions, even though that's not necessarily Jalen's strength. So you'd think you'd have A.J. lined up from a structural standpoint, a offensive standpoint within the scheme as being the first read a lot more times than not. The Steelers, I think, will get pressure to some degree. That's just what they do, right? T.J. Watt, Alex Highsmith, Nick Herbig, they're all healthy. It's really a dynamic threesome off the edge there. Cam Hayward actually leads the team in pressures, if you can believe it, at his age and from the inside. And then you sprinkle in Benton, and then they made the move for Preston Smith. The pressure's been relentless of late. When Highsmith is available, the Steelers have generated a 40% pressure rate, and number 2 in the league would be that 40% number, and Jalen Hurts has struggled in that area with the pressure. It's just a massive delta. He goes from an elite QB when kept clean to well below average when pressured. But if the Eagles can kind of come out and control this game, and you look at their run rates, especially in the second half, there probably won't be as many opportunities for the Steelers defense to kind of dictate with pressure, right? The Eagles are the only team in the NFL with more rushing than passing yards this season. So I think, there's 2 keys here for the Eagles offense. Have to be efficient running the ball. And I think that lessens the pressure because there just won't be as many opportunities for those guys to pin their ears and get up the field. And I would have to envision that being a real emphasis of Mike Tomlin this week, have to be able to stop the run so they can flourish on third down. But the Steelers' run defense has not a lot of people are talking about this, but it's been a real problem since coming out of their Week 9 bye. 47% rushing success rate allowed. That's 31st over that stretch, 30th in EPA per rush. They face some mobile quarterbacks, but that's what they're getting tasked with here as well. There's also like 2 data points against the Browns offense that can't spell run this season. So, if Pittsburgh can't stop the run to get themselves into possible passing down situations, it takes away that edge. On passing downs where the Steelers don't get pressure, it's very possible Hurts can show well here based upon the coverage looks. The Steelers are running the most man coverage defensively since Week 6. Jalen Hurts is exponentially better against man coverage. A.J. Brown, if you remember, that's why they went out and acquired him. They're like, this guy's an absolute man beater. And those two were a dynamic duo there. That's why Hurts had been so successful against man. So you got to get that going. I think on the flip side, just quickly here, the Steelers' offense has been living off the explosives of we've talked about, Todd. It's been very feast or famine, boom or bust. It's been the deep pass. And on all throws not deep, Russ actually has a negative EPA. Without George Pickens, those deep moon balls are far less effective. The Eagles' defense also number 2 in explosive pass prevention to begin with. You look at some of the separation rates. You mentioned like how Russ was kind of spreading the ball around last week. It's more of a byproduct of having to, right? No, aside from George Pickens, there really isn't anyone that's separating from this wide receiver group for the Steelers. There just aren't many paths for the Steelers on offense here. And defensively, if they can't stop the run, they can't get to their best attribute on defense. So it's just like one of those things where are the paths for the Steelers? But then you go down that road of laying this type of number against Mike Tomlin.
Narrative Street, baby, has a little bit of merit to it when it comes to Tomlin in this role. That's for sure. Whether we want to say it's black magic or something else along those lines, something funny happens every time the Steelers are underdogs.
It's just the Tomlin voodoo. He's a great motivator, and maybe that's what it is, right? We're not in that locker room, but the guys love him.
Yep.
The guys are willing to go to war with him, and he presents the case that, you're sitting here with another good season. They don't believe in us, and the motivation ratchets it up, and they come out with a very, very effective performance. That seems to be maybe the pedigree here.
It's incredible, and he deserves a world of credit to your points. He's not afraid to let inferior opponents hang around, and some of the road records for Tomlin as a road favorite or even as a big home favorite leave a little bit to be desired, but there is no way to dispute how dynamic he has been getting his teams to play up when they're catching points. No greater illustration than the short sample size we've seen this season, where the Steelers have flourished as a money line underdog when catching points. If we want to say that game isn't the marquee of Sunday afternoon, I guess this one would be between the Buffalo Bills and the Detroit Lions. Buffalo on the road for the second straight week. It's the Lions, a modest 2.5 point favorite. Largest total we've seen of the season at 54.5. Matched up of last week, the Buffalo Bills were forced to score 40-plus points. It wasn't enough. Came up short 44-42 against the Los Angeles Rams. The Lions last Thursday night needed every bit of their 34-point offensive outburst to slip by a division rival in the Green Bay Packers 34-31. This is a matchup, as you can understand, of the number one scoring offense in the Detroit Lions and the number two scoring offense of the Buffalo Bills. It's the matchup of the number one team in point per game differential in Detroit, plus 14.1, and Buffalo on the flip side, number two, plus 9.9, and the Lions rolling out a unique uniform combination for a game of this magnitude. The Bills offensively, Payne, going to get a little healthier. All signs point to the return of tight end Dalton Kincaid and Keon Coleman on the outside. Not a moment too soon, knowing how physical the Lions like to be in their man coverage scheme. Should be an opportunity for Keon to have a big day. Detroit defensively going to get some players back, at least if the injury reports are any indication. DJ Reader seems to be the biggest long shot dealing with the shoulder injury, but Aleem McNeil, who left under concussion protocol, some of the other depth pieces healthier in the defensive backfield. For Buffalo defensively, Matt Milano looked like a shell of himself as he's trying to rediscover his marquee ability as a coverage linebacker, one of the lowest graded defensive players according to PFF last week. It's a Buffalo defensive front that's going to be tested early and often by a Lions team that likes to deploy their tandem of backs with a little bit of physicality running downhill, and should have Taylor Decker back in the fold, giving them a healthy set of offensive linemen. So many different ways to go in this particular matchup. We've seen totals in this range. Typically, if you bet them under blindly over a 33-game sample size, totals this high, 23-10 to the under at 54 or greater the last 33 times. Not advocating for that, just food for thought. X's and O's between the Bills and Lions. What are you most curious to see on the field at Ford Field come Sunday afternoon?
So right off the bat, just discuss the number here a little bit. It seems to be another game with differing viewpoints early in the week. We saw some Bills money come in at 2.5 from one group. Since then, there's been Lions money at 1.5, and even 2 on Wednesday. And I think we're out to like 2.7 right now, call it Thursday morning. Josh Allen was historically good last week. Shredded zone coverage for the first time this season. We discussed the Bills receivers' ability to create separation against zone. Specifically, Shakur was elite doing that. He was fantastic again. Now, you get the complete opposite this week, right? The Lions are a man-heavy coverage unit. Aaron Glenn has, that Detroit defense playing man at the highest rate in the league. Josh has excelled against man, but defenses that kind of elect to play that style, it's because they don't think the Bills receivers are good enough to consistently create separation and win against it. Now, Josh seems to fare quite well, regardless of some of that separation being less against man than it is zone for those Bills receivers. But this is the reason you go and get an Amari Cooper. And 14 targets last week, so you're starting to see that rapport build a little bit. You mentioned Dalton Kincaid and Keon Coleman were full participants at practice on Wednesday, so that's a positive sign that Josh Allen could be getting back some reinforcements. Allen has absolutely shredded man coverage this season. 14% touchdown rate, good for number 2 in the league. If you're a fantasy owner, you've kind of seen the natural progression there for Josh Allen, as I think we talked about it right in the Rams game there. It's like the best players this time of year start to ratchet up their game and do just a little bit more. And we've seen that with Josh Allen on the ground now that these games are being, a little bit more meaningful. 33 designed and impromptu runs the last 4 games. He was averaging roughly 5 carries a week the first 9 weeks. So when you play man coverage like the Lions do, defenders' backs are to the quarterback. It opens up things for mobile quarterbacks. It's been the Achilles heel of Detroit's defense. The Lions are dead last the last 3 seasons defending quarterback runs. They're still dealing with injuries at linebacker, although getting a touch healthier there along the defensive line. We discussed last week the Bills' offense making a leap in perfect weather conditions, right? Lots of those games in Orchard Park and wind and snow. It's like all of a sudden this is an offense where splits do matter, especially when they play indoors. They just become a little bit of a different animal, and you have that here again. Flip it around to the other side. I think you have to wonder a little bit about the Bills' defense in this spot. The Lions' offensive line looks like it could be fully healthy again with Taylor Decker getting in a full practice on Wednesday. The mini bye appears to be pretty helpful here. That's a Detroit offensive line that likes to be physical and kind of sit on you and wear on you a little bit. It's the mentality of their coach. Montgomery and Gibbs get a few extra days of rest. They're going to be used here in a major way. The Bills' run defense allowed an average of the 6th most rushing yards before first contact this season. Backs have been able to kind of get their momentum going because of that forward, right? And it's led to the Buffalo surrendering the highest rate of chunk runs in the NFL, highest rate of 10-plus yard runs. The Rams ran the ball 42 times last week against Buffalo. Physical, right? Most rush attempts a defense has faced since 2018. The Bills' defense was on the field for more than 38 minutes, and some defenders faced 77 snaps. And so
it's a big workload.
Yeah, it's quite the workload. And you watched McDermott last week. We saw it Sunday night, and I know the scoreboard was positive for the Bills, so a lot of times you don't go in and dissect the wins because you just think everything's perfect. But there was a little bit of an adjustment there because the 49ers with CMC were able to get their ground game going early, and they kind of had to come out of their too high and play single a little bit and to negate the 49ers run game. McDermott was forced again last week to allocate more bodies to the box, and it exposed his defense on the back end. You mentioned Stafford's massive day there. It was historically good, 4th highest EPA of any quarterback this season last week. And so I wonder if Buffalo can actually load the box this week and feel comfortable on the back end if some of the key cogs are out back there. So you got to keep your eye on that injury report. You have a starting corner in Rasul Douglas, who was a DNP with a knee injury. I know last week he got shredded, and Bills fans are up in a tizzy on old social media, but he's been the perfect fit for a zone cover corner. Taylor Rapp is dealing with a neck injury as well, so those are 2 key cogs in that secondary for Buffalo that you got to keep your eyes peeled on. If McDermott is forced to add more guys to the box and a few guys are out, Ben Johnson is crafty enough to find the advantage, isolate, and attack. You look at some of the core principles of the Bills' defense, and it mirrors their head coach's personality, right? Conservative. Sits back in zone, doesn't blitz. It's a bend but don't break. If the Lions have another red zone day like they had, week 3 against the Buccaneers, the Bills are going to win outright. But they have the pieces to run and find success against the Bills' zone coverage, and Goff has been a top 5 quarterback with completion rates and yards per attempt against zone. And because the Bills don't blitz often, the pressure hasn't been great this season. Now, 1 game sample size could change Sunday, but in totality this season, the Bills bottom 10 in pressure rate. Goff has been a magician when he is kept clean and has time to operate and survey the field and deliver the ball accurately. This is one of those games, Todd, where it's the perfect depiction of the season and all its wonkiness, and there's a battle on the side. And it's not around a key number, and so that's even more telling, right? It's not overly telling when you say, hey, there's a battle here, and the game went from 1.5 to 3. There's probably going to be differing opinions on games like that, but this one hasn't been around a key, and there's still a battle. And then you kind of reference the total, and we're at like 54.5, which makes it very difficult for anyone's model to get that high. and you referenced the staggering trend there towards the unders with numbers. Who's comfortable playing the under here in this dome environment? Like, you're going to have some long, sustained running drives here from both teams that end in some field goals. And even if you get those early, I mean, it really just takes one or two drives to be like, man, I went from feeling comfortable to like, this thing may be dead.
The way this game stays under, to your point, talking about long clock-controlling drives that allows Detroit to potentially run the football, or Buffalo, who's not afraid to run it either. If this game, in my opinion, is played in a narrow one-score window throughout, that's probably the best path for this game to come in under. If one of these teams has to chase a multi-score deficit like we saw with the Lions and Packers, there is no chance this game stays under the total.
The thing about the Lions and Packers, though, if you looked at the adjusted box score, I mean, it was supposed to be played in the mid-40s.
Yep. Oh, you had short fields and everything else, and a couple of scenarios that were a little bit unique to put points on the board. And the Rams game wasn't as loose as the final score indicated until Buffalo was down 31-14, and the pump block kind of changed the dynamic and tenor of that game.
Yeah, I mean, the Thursday night game, you can say, hey, Detroit's offense had some variance scores. Sure. I don't necessarily view like 4th and 2 with an elite offense when you have Jahmyr Gibbs lined up on a linebacker variance. Like, I would think that's, unless Goff is dirting one or Gibbs is dropping a ball, that's like 9 out of 10 times when you get that matchup going. But they were aggressive, and you had the 2 short field touchdowns for the Packers offense, one on the 4th and an inch stop, and then the interception out of the half, and so it set up 2 short field scores. But yeah, that was very much a game that played to an under, even though it snuck over. And then you had even, I think, the Thursday game on Thanksgiving was a bit of a game that kind of played around that number, but certainly didn't look like that was going to be the case at halftime, with the Bears kind of coming out and showing a surge there in the second half. So this one, you look at the number, and I think there's a lot of people ingrained saying, hey, like, I gotta bet this under. Certainly my model doesn't get there, but you definitely have to make an adjustment for the Bills offense indoors, and keep your eyes peeled there on that secondary for Buffalo. That's the interesting thing, right? Like, if Keon and Kincaid get upgraded on the screen, and then all of a sudden you get Rasul Douglas out on the screen. 55 and a half becomes a distinct possibility. I think those 3 players all pushing health in one direction towards offense, makes that kind of difficult in 55. Not that there's a ton of totals that get in that range. When we saw that 2020 season when there was no fans in the stands, we had some really high totals. 55 is to some degree a very, very key number.
Must-see TV for sure for anybody that loves a little bit of offensive-minded football, potentially loves to watch some of the better teams do battle, and who knows, maybe it is a sign of things to come if the Lions emerge as the champions of the NFC and Buffalo can punch their ticket out of the AFC, that we could see these teams playing again for a little bit more in New Orleans in the middle of February. You can follow Payne on social media at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there as well. Most importantly, be sure to follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod with some scheduling updates around the holiday season. We, of course, will be back next Wednesday breaking down the college football playoff. NFL schedule remains intact, but around the Christmas and New Year's holidays, things may change a little bit, and the Bet the Board podcast feed will be the best vehicle to give you those proper updates so you don't miss a single show. Colts, Broncos, Payne. A de facto elimination game, at least for the Indianapolis Colts and any potential AFC playoff prospects they may have in front of them. Both teams come into this game well-rested off a late-season bye, and it's Denver, a 4-point favorite across the board. There are 3.5s juice. There are 4.5s, depending on which side of the coin you fall on. Total of the game sits at 44. This is a Colts team, 4-1 straight up, 5-0 against the number, the last 5 games following a bye week. How relevant is that here? Minimal relevance, given the fact that Shane Steichen has not been their head coach during that entire stretch. The Broncos, when the odds makers have installed them as a favorite, have not let their backers down, going 6-0 against the number so far this season. Overall, when it comes to extended prep time, Sean Payton coached teams 41-21 straight up, a 66% success rate in his career. including 26 and 13 straight up. The ATS numbers, though, not nearly as gaudy in that regard. And the Denver Broncos seeking to secure their first playoff appearance as a franchise since 2015 after winning the Super Bowl 59 years ago. It's actually the longest playoff drought following a Super Bowl win all time. Colts injuries should be a little bit healthier this week. Josh Downs got in a full in Wednesday's practice dealing with a shoulder injury. The offensive line health is at least on the surface trending up, although unfortunately for Colts fans and potentially Colts backers, Braden Smith expected to miss on Sunday as per head coach Shane Steichen, dealing with a little bit of a personal issue. Hope all is well there. Denver, their injury report relatively clean, but there is one notable absence, at least on Wednesday. Riley Moss still dealing with that knee injury, and we saw how porous that Denver secondary was the last time we saw the Broncos in prime time on Monday Night Football against the Cleveland Browns, putting a lot of pressure on Levi Wallace on the other side. Colts, Payne, they want to run the football. They want to try and make the game as simple and straightforward as Anthony Richardson. He has been a deep ball, explosive pass play merchant, even if the down-to-down success isn't there. Meanwhile, Bo Nix on the other side continues to make his case to be Rookie of the Year as those numbers have shortened against Jaden Daniels. And look, you come up with electric throws for 91-yard touchdowns while the entire world's watching, and you're scrambling outside the pocket, throwing on a laser. People have to take notice. But Colts-Broncos, Sunday afternoon, should be a fascinating matchup and one that offers all sorts of opportunities and yet again appears to be a battle in the betting market.
So I think these lines come out, right? There's some look-ahead lines. You start to like peek at them a week early, and then you see where they've readjusted Sunday night. And you know, this is before you've downloaded all your data from those Sunday games and kind of plugged it in and figured out what's what completely and gone through injuries and whatnot. But you know, as I looked at this game and you see it open Sunday night at like 5.5, you're like, boy, this feels a touch high, right? Because you're looking at this and you're saying to yourself, well, the Colts might be 2-3 their last 5 games, but the losses are to the Vikings, Bills, and Lions, like all teams we have power rated towards the top of the league. And they were far more competitive against the Bills than the final score. They could have got out early because they had 2 marches against the Lions that would have made that game a little bit more different. And then you look at what Denver's done the last 3 games. It's like, sure, they've won 3 games, so all of a sudden their market number should, in theory, be at its peak. And then you're like, oh, well, they played the Falcons the game after the suspicious Kirk Cousins injury transpired, and there was like 5 starters out for the Falcons defense, including 3 guys in the secondary. And it's like, okay, then you played the Raiders, and you were losing at halftime in that game. And you know, the adjusted box score certainly didn't indicate a 10-point win. And then you played the Browns last week and on Monday night, and anybody who laid it with the Browns, congratulations. We would love to run like you. Terrible bet. The Browns were certainly the right side in that game. The Broncos were very, very fortunate to cover that mess. And so you're just like looking at those 2 things and you're like, okay, this makes some sense. Then you start to dig into the matchup. And there's some things here that would make you not feel as great, right? Specific to the matchup. Bo Nix has, to your point, I think shown some signs of life. It's very much been matchup dependent, right?
Well, I came armed with Bo Nix data because I know you're a detractor if I need to share it. So,
yeah, I mean, Sean Payton has put him in better positions to succeed by focusing on his strengths and shrinking the playbook with things that he didn't necessarily like. And you're thinking like that's what coaches should do, and I completely agree. But it does limit the things the opposing defense has to prepare for. And eventually, when those same things get put on film, it's easier to make those adjustments, right? And Sean Payton, to your point, over the years has been a mind that shows well offensively out of the bye, so maybe some things that we haven't seen for Bo Nix unfold here. You also look at some of the core components of the Colts defense, and they just haven't been the things that give Bo Nix trouble. Now, albeit a very small sample size of NFL games so far, but Indy lives in cover 3, right? We've talked about that ad nauseum with Gus Bradley. The guy just does not adjust. He uses it at the highest rate in the league. That's been the coverage that's provided Bo Nix with the best passing metrics he has all season in his entire NFL career to this point. That's where he's flourished. Now, in fairness, a lot of that sample size is against the Falcons recently, where they live in cover 3 as well, and they had lots of guys out in the secondary. So how do you value that? Certainly he's been better against cover 3 prior to that game. The other thing that we've seen with Bo Nix is he has been one of the quarterbacks in the league most sensitive to pressure. Graded out QB 34 of 42 qualifiers under pressure. More of the measurable metrics indicate that Bo Nix has been bottom 5 handling pressure. Monday night even. We all love the pass, the deep pass there on 3rd and a mile. That results in a 93-yard Marvin Mims touchdown. But this was a quarterback who was 18 for 35 with 2 interceptions and did not handle pressure well at all again on Monday night against the Browns. The Colts, to this point, haven't shown that they're going to bring a ton of pressure. 22nd in pass rush win rate. It's equated to an actual 26% pressure rate. The Colts don't really send blitzes under Gus Bradley. So on the surface, it would appear as if Bo Nix is going to be somewhat comfortable, and the things that he's taken advantage of this season are what the Colts present defensively. Now, you flip it around to the other side. Defensively, the Broncos' pressure this season has been elite, 39%, second in the league. It's meshed with the win rate of 3rd overall. Anthony Richardson is graded out QB 23 against pressure. He's dead last in completion rate when pressured. He's been horrid against the blitz as well, and the Broncos blitz at a top 5 rate. Now, there is potential for the Colts to hit explosives. You mentioned Riley Moss being out. That is massive. Levy Wallace, my goodness, sir.
Looked like a traffic cone out there.
It's like his feet were in quicksand. He eventually got benched after being torched, and I mean torched. They had to go to the rookie out of Missouri there, Abram Drains. I start to look at Denver, even with Patrick Surtain Jr. on the outside. The loss of Riley Moss has been felt. It started to be felt a little bit even before that. The Broncos are 25th, allowing 9.2 yards per attempt to wide receivers. Steichen probably looks to get their backs involved in the pass game. 31st defending that. That's over the back half of the season, those two numbers in terms of what they're allowing to outside receivers into running backs in the pass game. You would expect an aggressive attack with Steichen out of the bye, going tempo. Richardson healthier. We know his run rate increases against the blitz, which he's going to see here. Offensive line for the Colts is healthier. Whatever the Colts have, you would expect to see in this spot. Massive playoff implications on the line here. This is the biggest game of the Colts season. Win, and they're a game back of the Broncos with the tiebreaker. Lose, and your season's all but done. And so, I go back to that Sunday night mindset of like seeing 5.5 with their season on the line, and I look how they've played the last 5 games, and their only losses are to the elites of the NFL, and I think about, again, the Broncos maybe having a price point that's a little bit too high based upon beating the dregs of the league the last 3 weeks and being very fortunate in some of those games, specifically, again, the Browns on last Monday night. But we got to a point at 3.5 where if you're just kind of looking at some of the numbers out there in the stratosphere in terms of power numbers, that number may have gotten a touch low. And so as we were about to record this morning here, Todd, we saw a couple places drift back to that 4.5 range.
Yeah.
So another battle here on this game.
It's just wild to continue to watch the battles take place in terms of how you're evaluating teams based on current form, some of the priors, the data points, and, of course, the particular matchup that they're going to encounter here. But to your point, a game that all eyes as NFL fans should be on. It may not be the marquee between some of the elite teams in the league, but seismic playoff ramifications for two teams that would love nothing more than to send young quarterbacks to the postseason for the first time in their careers. Sunday Night Football, Payne, the final game on our docket and the final game on the Sunday schedule, takes us out to the Pacific Northwest, where it's the Seahawks welcoming in the Green Bay Packers. Green Bay, fresh off of their mini-bye and narrow defeat on the road at the Detroit Lions. Seattle, winners of 4 straight games, sweeping the season series against the Arizona Cardinals, now with a commanding lead in the odds market to win the NFC West, but a 2.5-point home underdog in this spot. That number did see some money come in on the road favorite, get out to 3, and there's been a little bit of resistance here as we record on a Thursday morning. If the Seahawks do indeed close as underdogs, and no reason to believe they won't, on Sunday Night Football, it'll be their 9th consecutive game as a dog. Dating back to Week 6, they were last favored in a game in Week 5 against the New York Giants, one they lost outright in that particular spot. Just the second team in the wild card era to be listed as an underdog in 9 straight games while owning a winning percentage of 60% or higher, joining the Minnesota Vikings back in 2012. At the same time, the NFC North, well, their trials and tribulations and more about the success they've experienced as a division have been well documented. As a division, now 29-9 straight up and 25-13 against the number versus other divisions this year. The 29-9 mark is the second best for a full season by any division since 1990, joining the 2013 NFC West during that time period. And Payne, this is a Green Bay team who metrically, it's tough to try and figure out and get a better grasp on what you're going to see from them each and every week. Jordan Love's numbers don't blow you away against the Lions. Josh Jacobs didn't do a whole hell of a lot in that game, but was able to find pay dirt 3 times. Love looked to be a little bit more comfortable as a scrambler in the pocket and an offensive line that is still a plus unit. Green Bay defensively should have the services of Jair Alexander back in the fold, which will pay dividends against the Seattle team, who has a dynamic 1-2 receiving combination in DK Metcalf and Jackson Smith and Jigba. Kenneth Walker, I don't believe, will be out there. Could be the Zach Charbonnet show for the second straight week coming off of his career day. But Geno Smith, for the first time in a while, may not have to deal with a muddy pocket. Green Bay has really struggled to generate pressure, and they leave the middle of the field wide open if opposing quarterbacks want to take advantage of it.
So, another game with a battle. Right, group got out, laid 2.5 early in the week at 3, buyback. And as you mentioned there, right before we flipped on to talk about this, basically all the 3 minus 20 that you could have found on Seattle still has been wiped out, and we're trending back towards 2.5 flat on this game. Certainly, the Seahawks defense has been elite since exiting their bye. Offensively, Seattle has some nice weapons. We bought the Seahawks heading into the season, and I still probably would not put them in the upper tier of the league. I do believe they've kind of gravitated, and this may surprise some people, but they've gravitated more towards an above-average team with how they've played since they've come out of the bye. Odds makers wouldn't dictate this team being elite either, right? That's why they're catching 2.5 in Lumen, one of the largest home field advantages in the NFL. There's been some positive variance since the bye, right? Pick sixes, interception, setting up short fields. I'm also struggling with the Packers, though, Todd, and I think we've discussed their potential ends of the spectrum because there's so much young talent where if the Packers fully realize that potential, their peak could be higher than just about any team in the league. It's more of that, what are you getting down to down consistency? Now, Jordan Love has been fantastic the last month. He's healthy. He's protected the football better, although he does have 4 turnover-worthy plays the last 4 games. He's been number 2 in EPA per play over that stretch, 3rd in success rate. The Packers' offense is number 1 in EPA per drive over this 4-game stretch, which, again, is small. It's a very small sample size. I like Matt LaFleur, but I kind of have my reservations with how good Green Bay has perceived to have been in recent weeks. It's the 49ers defense with multiple injuries and Brandon Allen at quarterback, right? It's the Dolphins secondary who had 3 starters out by halftime. The adjusted box score showed a 1-point win after the Dolphins were held scoreless on trips to the Packers' 1 and 38-yard lines, and it was coupled with a Packers 9-yard touchdown drive to start the game off a muffed punt. It's the Lions defense that we mentioned had gobs of injury along the defensive line, and it only got worse as the game went on with Aleem McNeil leaving. I'm I'm having a difficult time figuring out how the Packers got to 31 last week, right? I know the run game looks better because you see Josh Jacobs score 3 rushing touchdowns, but it was only 3.7 a carry, 66 rushing yards in total. I know Jordan Love spammed the explosives, but he finished 12 for 20 in that game. And you dig deeper, it's a 16-yard touchdown drive after a turnover force. It's a 30-yard drive after the Lions couldn't pick up an inch on 4th down. It's a TD drive out of the half that's fueled by a massive explosive, as we talked about, and then it's a variance down, 3rd and 10 diving touchdown grab by a 265-pound tight end. So
the Lions were able to remove what should be Green Bay's number one weapon in Jaden Reed and no Romeo Doubs. So I know people go, well,
it was. Think about the game plan. That was the most head scratching game plan because they came out in heavy formation and wanted to establish the ground game. And I get it when you look at the defensive line for the Lions, but they didn't come out and put anybody in the slot to attack the Lions' weakness.
No. There was nobody there. I mean, Reed targeted one time, although his production overall has really tailed off over the last couple weeks without Romeo Doubs, and Christian Watson has been the beneficiary. Go figure.
So, I'm having trouble assessing the Packers to the levels others are. It's a relative thing. I don't think the Packers are bad. I'm not saying that. I'm just hearing the Packers being talked about at a level that I'm not comfortable with because they live on the explosive play. And Seattle's defense is number 1 in explosive play prevention. Now, you mentioned, Doubs. He's back, is my understanding. Now, defensively, something somewhat similar with the Packers. We like Jeff Hafley. You can go back to the college podcast, right? With his time at BC, we thought he was getting more than the talent level. We thought he would come in and improve the Packers' defense. And if you just look at the surface level stuff, Green Bay sits at 8th in EPA per play. 11th in schedule-adjusted defense. You're like, holy shit, this is awesome. But they've also benefited greatly from turnovers, and you can see that delta between the EPA numbers and the success rate. 8th in EPA, as I mentioned. 28th in success rate defensively. Typically, that would indicate regression is coming. But then you see Ben Baldwin's nugget that's gone viral this week about the North Division flexing their muscles and dominating everybody, right? I mean, the Lions, Vikings, and Packers are a combined 28-3 against the spread outside their own division. So maybe regression isn't coming. There's just a ton of variance in this game for me. And even in one of the matchups, which I think, hit perfectly and led me in the right direction, Seattle has not been able to protect Geno Smith this season. Geno Smith has not been the quickest to release it. That combination's led to a 38% pressure rate faced for Seattle's offense. Are the Packers the team to expose that? I mean, they're 26th in pass rush win rate. Seattle does have the receivers to expose the Packers secondary, but now Jair Alexander returns. And so for me, it's one of those games where it's just kind of passed for me. And then throw in the other element of we're not quite sure what the weather's going to be here. I mean, there's conversations where it's showing like there's a little wind right now, but then you look at some other projections and you're like, boy, this could just be an absolute wind tunnel game if the wind is coming in from a specific direction. And so there's some variance in that with the weather. And so you have a Seahawks team that has not shown an ability to run the ball. They're down potentially their best back again. And we've seen the Packers really emphasize the run game with Josh Jacobs. Now, it hasn't been overly efficient, like I mentioned last week, with the 3.7 a carry. But they're willing to run it. And so it's just it's difficult here because I'm just having a tough time gauging what the Packers truly are. I think they're a very good football team, right? I believe we have them, and this may surprise some people, we have them basically a T7 in our power rating. I know there's folks that think they're like the 4th best team in the league. I have trouble getting there. If you think they're the 4th best team in the league, then I could see why you'd want to get out and lay 2.5. If you're using full season metrics, you probably don't get to a great number on the Seahawks if you're kind of parsing it out and saying, hey, the defense has made fundamental changes with removing guys that they didn't feel fit the system at linebacker, and now they have those guys. And they were able to have a little bit of a better understanding of this defense with, 2 weeks coming out of the bye, and that's more of this Seahawks defense than what it was when they were injured earlier in the season. then you're probably going to have to make a manual adjustment to your Seahawks number. And so for those folks that are higher on the Seahawks and don't have the Packers, power rated 4th overall, that's why you saw the buy at 3.
Yeah, I mean, I think this game will tell us a lot
really
more about the
one.
Seahawks defense, in my opinion, than what we've seen over the last couple of weeks.
Agreed.
Just because they've had to play the
Packers
Cardinals
offense
twice.
at their peak. Yes, and that's a very good matchup for them, as we've indicated, with their rates of man coverage and their ability to get pressure on Kyler and how he's kind of literally and figuratively shrunk against those types of defenses.
Great game to watch. Fascinating for football fans, for two teams that clearly have aspirations of playing deep into the month of January, and the Green Bay Packers and the Seattle Seahawks. You can follow Payne on social media at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. Again, most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And Payne, best bet portion of the program. I know we kicked around a number of games before the show. Some numbers have moved in our favor. Some numbers have moved against. How are we getting to the window this fine week 15?
Yeah, so we talked a little bit off air, and I think you were good maybe presenting the case of this one and doing a little bit of reconnaissance myself and digging in. I agree with it. It's a little bit of a meshing of two ideas. Let's go to 469. Pittsburgh Steelers team total under 19.5 points. Available at multiple shops that are currently having the highest limits on those games. We broke this game down in full detail a little bit earlier, so the timestamp is there if you want to go back and listen. But I think overarching, we've seen this Philadelphia Eagles defense grow up. We're starting to see them really take strides. They've been good against the run now, 4th in schedule-adjusted run defense. So if the Steelers are going to at least start the game in a happy run rate, Philadelphia should be able to slow that down a little bit in this spot. And then we think about Russell Wilson and where he's been his very best this season. It's pushing the ball down the field. As I mentioned in the breakdown, negative EPA on all throws that have not been deep. You're missing George Pickens. The cast of receivers that are left have not been great separating. A lot of those young corners for the Eagles defense have continued to grow up, and in years past, you'd say, hey, Freiermuth is going to look good in this spot. I think he's still got a chance to, but we've seen with Nakobe Dean and a couple other changes made at linebacker and some of the better coverage in the slot from the corner position for the Philadelphia Eagles. They're now like top 7 and a lot of metrics defending tight ends where that was their Achilles heel in the past. So, if you're not dominating on the ground, which we wouldn't envision, you can't find a massive void in the middle of the field against, with the tight end position, and you're not able to hit the explosive down the field without George Pickens present. The offense has a little bit of a governor on it for the Pittsburgh Steelers. This kind of negates there's multiple paths here, Todd, where if this is like a grinded out, low scoring game where you're like, hey, I kind of want to back Philly, but it ends 4. You still have a chance to win there. If Philly is able to kind of play keep away with their ground game, it means less time on the field for Pittsburgh's offense. I understand this is as you alluded to, an interstate battle here where it's a rivalry game and everyone's going to be up for it. So you envision some intensity from both the defenses, and energy and effort is very key. From the defensive side of the ball, but there's also, let's paint a picture of, the other potential game state where Philadelphia does come out and they are comfortably leading in this game, right? Their ground game, they don't pass a lot in the second half. So you have the ability to drain the clock and, again, keep Pittsburgh's offense off the field. But maybe there's also a point, and I wouldn't say, it's a great percentage, but there's a non-zero chance where Pittsburgh says, hey, we're down 2 scores here late, and we got our division rival here. I understand this is an interstate battle, but in terms of our own division in the AFC, a little bit more meaningful game on deck against the Baltimore Ravens. Do we shut it down? Now, it's a non-zero chance. I'm not saying it's a great chance, but that's still in play to some degree here as well with this topic.
So many interesting storylines to follow in a game like this, and while we alluded to Mike Tomlin being great as an underdog, to your point, I think Pittsburgh, if they're going to have success in this game, can't afford to turn into a track meet, has to cherish possessions, run the football, feel comfortable punting, and forcing a Philadelphia offense that's operated in fits and spurts for stretches to drive the entire field instead of giving them short fields and opportunities. And you could see Mike Tomlin return to his slightly more conservative tendencies in a game like this instead of electing to go for it on 4th and short and plus territory if he feels he's a little bit hamstrung with offensive playmakers. So let's see what we got and hope that the Philadelphia defense does its part to keep Pittsburgh's offense largely in check from start to finish. Anything else, kind sir, you'd like to share with our loyal listeners before we wish them the best of luck for NFL Week 15?
I think that's all I got, sir.
All right, we emptied the tank, we deliberated games, broke down every game that seems to have a battle in the market. It's rinse and repeat around these parts. So for Payne, I'm Todd Fuhrman. Best of luck to all of you, our loyal listeners. And with a Pittsburgh Steelers team total ticket in that portfolio come Sunday afternoon, we'll see you at the window.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of Bet the Board. Make sure you follow Todd and Payne on X. Todd is at Todd Fuhrman. That's TODDFUHRMAN. And Payne is at Payne Insider. That's PAYNEINSIDER. Don't forget, our weekly newsletter comes with an additional best bet. Have that delivered to your inbox by clicking the link atop the podcast show notes. And most importantly, subscribe and download Bet the Board. We're on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Wondery, YouTube, Google Podcasts, and all your other major platforms.